Morning, everyone. It's great to be back from vacation. We don't normally do this, but if you're just joining us online this morning, we welcome you especially. I was looking at the list of people, and I just want to give a shout out to the John family. Steve and Peggy and Peggy's parents are watching this morning, and I know others as well. We're so glad that you're with us and online and watching. So God bless you today. I'm going to start this morning with a little bit of a story. When Chris and I were poor seminary students many, many years ago with our 3 preschool-age daughters living in Pasadena, California, we lived quite a Spartan existence, as you might imagine. We knew we were living on loans, borrowing money to get by, to pay school expenses and everything else. So we tried to limit our expenditures, as you might do, so as not to accumulate more and more student debt. However, one of the amazing gifts of that time in our lives when we lived in Pasadena were our friends Pam and Dawn. Actually, Pam and Chris were childhood friends, grew up in Centralia, Washington, south of Seattle. And Pam and her husband lived actually in San Bernardino County, and they had a successful business there. We were, same age, but they were well along in their life. And so they were in a much different financial category than we were, if you can imagine. And they were very generous people. So one day, where did this come from? I think maybe over here. I don't know.
My budget.
Our budget. So anyway, one day our friends Pam and Dodd said, we would love to treat you to a dinner at one of our favorite places in Long Beach. I think the restaurant was called Captain Jack's Steakhouse. It's not Captain Jack Sparrow. The guy's name was actually Jack, I think. But anyway, it was what a meal we had that night. I remember Chris and I both ordered prime rib. And when they brought the prime rib, I kid you not, it was 2 inches thick. And it was on a dinner plate, a regular sized dinner plate, but it like fell over the edges of all sides of the dinner. It's just giant piece. I think they said it's 32 ounces of prime rib. And I think we had roast beef about every meal for 2 weeks afterwards. We were just parceling it out and trying to eat. But what I remember most about that evening was not the food, but what happened when we arrived at the restaurant. It was a big place, lots of tables, and involved kind of taking a serpentine route, through the maze of tables to get to our table. But every time we came to an intersection of paths in the restaurant, there was a staff member there, standing there, who said to our host, "Good evening, Mr. Gebhard." Or we came around another corner, "Welcome back, Mr. Gebhard," all the way through the restaurant. And I remember thinking, whoa, I had no idea. They know him here. Pretty impressive, right? Of course, Chris and I, talking about it later, realized it was probably just something the restaurant did with just about everyone who arrived. They would pass the name back to the welcoming team, and those people would stand at certain places, and then they would say, off you go, and they would welcome you in that way. Pretty ingenious, really. But they knew it's powerful to be known and welcomed personally. It's powerful. I like that. It's one of the reasons I go back to kind of my familiar haunts here in Marysville, Cristiano's Pizza restaurant and La Hacienda over here. I like going into La Hacienda, and I walk in and they say, "Senor Mason, welcome back." I like that. It's to be known, to be greeted by a friendly face. It's a good feeling, Bottom line, it feels good to be known. It's important. When a good friend looks at you and says, "I got you this gift because I know you, and I knew you would appreciate it. That means a lot, doesn't it? When you're having a hard time and a close friend or a family member calls and says, this is hard, isn't it? I know you. I feel for you. Those are words with healing potential in them. Well, the same is true of your relationship with God. We often talk about how important it is to know God, to know Jesus as our Lord and our Savior. Very important. But what about the fact that God knows you? There was a very important book written, I think, in the 70s called Knowing God. It was by J.I. Packer, and it was a seminal work, a very important book. But J.I. Packer also wrote these words, and I love this. The man who wrote the book Knowing God also said this, and I quote, "What matters supremely is not, in the last analysis, the fact that I know God, but the larger fact that underlies it, the fact that He knows me. I am never out of His mind. All my knowledge of Him depends on His sustained initiative in knowing me. I know Him because He first knew me and continues to know me. He knows me as a friend, one who loves me. There's not a moment when His eye is off me or His attention distracted from me, and no moment, therefore, when His care falters." The text we have before us this morning, Psalm 139, I think it's the most famous Old Testament passage about being known by God. "O Lord, you have searched me and known me." Verse 1. So I spent this week studying this passage, and as I did, I was just struck by the fact that there are, in the first 3 verses of this psalm, there are 5 different verbs that express this knowing activity of God. Verse 1, God searches us. God knows us. Verse 2, God discerns when we sit or stand, when we arrive or leave. Verse 3, He, using a different word, searches out our paths. He is acquainted with all our ways. Bottom line, God actively investigates our lives and everything about us. So to what effect? Well, verse 5 suggests that it's just so comforting to know that God is all around us. In the NRSV translation that you heard this morning, it says it this way: "You have hemmed me in and laid your hand upon me." This hemming in suggests to me a protective covering or a vigilant, watchful awareness. I think parents understand this in a way that maybe others could learn from. Those of you who have children, grandchildren, you know, there's this kind of radar sense that kicks in. You know what I'm talking about? I remember when we visited the Gulf Islands in British Columbia one summer, when our kids were little, we hiked into a lake above a body of water called Teekern Arm. And it involved walking kind of over a cliff area. And I vividly remember the feeling of being so on edge, literally. Just seeing if you're awake. But having that feeling of just a little nervous the whole time as we spent a few minutes near that cliff. Our kids were grade school age, but I was on high alert, aware of each one of the three of them, which way they were moving, where they were in relation to the edge of that cliff. This is, I think, what the psalmist is trying to say here about God. That he's aware of us at this level of care. That God knows how vulnerable we are, where the dangers are, and which way we are moving. And he hems us in loving care. And this is much of the meaning, I think, of the first 6 verses of Psalm 139. Now, the next 6 verses, which are not part of our reading, talk about God's everywhere presence, his omnipresence, to use the fancy theological word. Again, to reassure us that wherever we go, God is there with us. Then, in verses 13 through 18, God's omnipotence, another $10 word. I'm helping you with your vocabulary this morning. Omnipotence meaning that the God who can create. Namely, that God created you and me. That amazing phrase is here in verse 13, picturing God knitting you together in your mother's womb. The psalmist is amazed at the way God that he is marvelously made, and immediately he breaks out into adoration and praise of God, the Lord that can do this, the God that can shape and sculpt a human body bit by bit into the beauty and the wonder of a newborn child. I got to hold 5-week-old Angelica this week. Angelica is one of our newest members of our family. She's Mela's 5-week-old daughter. Just came home last week from the hospital after spending about a month in the NICU. She's home. She's healthy. She's beautiful. I looked at her and thought, there really is nothing more beautiful than an infant. Just perfect in every way. And the psalmist attributes this to the God who searches us and never leaves us, the God who can create this kind of beautiful being. He's the creator. He's the artist who can make such wonder and beauty from nothing. Creatio ex nihilo. Creation from nothing. This is what God can do. And this is the God who knows you. The same God who will always be with you. The God who formed you. To bring this to a point this morning, I'd like to suggest that its awareness of being known, really known by God, is super important, especially when things are not going well. I remember a crisis in my life. It was about at the 10-year point of my work as a pastor. I was balancing a full workload of youth ministry and music and worship ministry, dealing with all the details of pulling off major events for both of those programs in our church in North Seattle. And I believe it was late summer. Might have even been Labor Day weekend. I think it was, because I had asked the leadership team of high school students to meet me early on Monday morning. This is one of the things we did. We had a meeting early, like 6 o'clock on Monday morning. Really early. School started at like 7:30 for them, so 6 o'clock was when we met with this group. It was crazy, I know, but anyway, high school students, they were willing to do it. But it was, I forgot it was Labor Day that Monday, and as the date got closer, I also forgot to cancel the meeting or change it to another day, and so everyone, including me, forgot about it altogether on that Labor Day Monday morning. That is except for one super responsible student who insisted that her parents bring her home on Sunday evening, cutting their family 3-day weekend short about 24 hours so that she could attend the meeting. So I got this early Labor Day phone call. "Hi, John. I'm here at the church. Where is everyone?" I thought, oh no. So guess what happened? My next phone call was her father, who was one of the church elders, a busy executive who would have enjoyed his 3-day weekend, which was cut down to a 2-day weekend. And he simply said, "Hey, John, I need to talk to you. Be at my office tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. I obeyed. What do you think I heard in his office? I can't tell you word for word, but I can tell you some of the words he used that I heard that day. I remember the word follow through. I remember the word disorganized. I remember the word haphazard. Irresponsible was one of the words he used. Basically, I was chewed out. And some of it was well-deserved. So a couple of weeks went by. I spent that 2 weeks soundly beating myself up pretty completely for questioning whether this pastoral work was the right thing for me. And we ended up at my parents' home in mid-September, and I remember grousing around and pouring all this self-loathing I was dealing with, pouring it out to my mother, who was such a good listener. She didn't say very much. Mostly she just listened, to a point. But I'll never forget that moment when she finally spoke. She said, "John, you have just described yourself as disorganized, lacking follow-through, and irresponsible. I want to say to you, I disagree with you." And then these words, "I know you. I've watched you and known you your whole life. You have never been these things." That's all she said. And it was enough, though. I can't tell you how life-giving those words were. Basically, if those things weren't completely true about me, then perhaps there was another explanation for what happened. Like, possibly I had too much on my plate. These things happen. But to be known, when you're in crisis, to hear the words, "I know you," that's powerful. So I'm wondering today, is there a crisis that is staring you down? Is it possible that you are assuming some things about yourself that are not accurate? Is it possible that you're assuming some things about your situation that are not accurate? Are you open to hearing God say to you, "I have searched you. I have watched you. I've investigated your life. I made you"? What else is he wanting to say to you today? Would you pray with me?